Your favorite PGA and LPGA legends, pros and top instructors are right here every week on Next on the Tee. Join Chris as the greats of the game share their stories, insights and playing lessons. Now, back to Chris and more of the show.
All right, now back with me here on Next on the Tee is Tony Jacklin. Let me remind you about Mr. Jacklin's background. He turned pro at the age of 17 back in 1962. In 1968, he became the first European player to win on the PGA Tour since the 1920s at the Jacksonville Open Invitational. A year later, he won his first major at the Open Championship at Royal Lytham in St. Anne's. In 1970, he won the U.S. Open at Hazeltine, becoming the first British player to win the U.S. Open since Ted Ray in 1920. In 1985, he captained the European team to a Ryder Cup victory, which marked the first loss by the U.S. team since 1957. Backed that up with a second consecutive Ryder Cup win in 1987, marking the first ever U.S. loss on American soil. He would go on to make it a three-peat for Europe in 1989. 2002, he was elected into the World Golf Hall of Fame. 2006, he and Jack Nicklaus opened a concession club in Bradenton, Florida, commemorating the putt conceded by Mr. Nicklaus to Mr. Jacklin, which ensured the 1969 Ryder Cup competition would end in a draw. In all, Mr. Jacklin has won 8 times on the European Tour, 4 times on the PGA Tour, and twice on the Senior Tour. He has a wonderful new book that is hitting stores today titled Bad Lies, A Story of Libel, Slander, and Professional Golf, which he wrote alongside Shelby Yastro, and I'm honored that he is back with me tonight here on Next on the Tee. Good evening, Mr. Jacklin. Thank you for coming back on the show.
No, it's my pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
So, Mr. Jacklin, let's start out by talking about your new book, which is a fictional account of a guy named Eddie Bennison, who is having a lot of success out on the Champions Tour until a Golf Magazine article accuses him of cheating and doping. So I'm curious, what inspired you to write a book like that?
Well, it wasn't me. It was a chance meeting, actually, with my co-author, Shelby, at the Ryder Cup at Hazeltine. We hit it off together, and he'd already written a couple of novels, and he told me that he was working on this book about golf. He's an avid golfer. He's crazy for the game. And he gave me the outline of the book. We went beyond that. I started collaborating with him. And I was intrigued by the whole, the story, the way it was all done. The golf aspect was, Shelby's just an unbelievable, avid amateur. And I think I was able to bring some perspective of the professional game into it for him. It's a fascinating read. It's a terrific read. And, here we go, 18 months or almost 2 years later, we're launching it, and it's a very exciting time for both of us.
And Mr. Jacklin, you guys weave into the story a woman accusing Dennison, the main character, right, of physical abuse. So this is kind of a complete destruction of the man's character. Talk about that and, bringing all of that together into a kind of a world about, First Amendment rights, free speech, and how it's both a sword and a shield.
Well, yeah, it was Charlie Mayfair, the lawyer, the defense, his job to keep that story out of the courtroom. And it goes back and forth. The characters in this thing are so strong. And in fact, the first time I read it, I said to my wife, this is movie stuff. And obviously, Bennison was devastated when these stories came out. And golf confidence of a golfer, the very fine line you have to straddle to be a great player. His confidence was wrecked after these articles were written about him. The whole courtroom thing and back and forth between the courtroom and golf is just a fascinating read altogether.
Just a couple more on the book, and like I say, it's a bit about, at least it comes across to me as about First Amendment rights, but it also sort of seems to me like it is a commentary a bit about our media, and then sort of a statement on society and what it's like out there for the professional athletes today. Is all of that really the story about the underlying story of the story?
Absolutely, and I remember in my early days when I was in my pomp, the British press were a tough bunch, and you get a lot of stuff written about you from time to time that's just not exactly true. Sometimes they make stuff up, and this is why I was drawn into this. In many ways, I left Britain as a young man because I hated what was happening through the media to me. There were different opinions from different fronts, and they didn't always know what they were talking about, and it's not the right place. It's not where you want to be. So I've been living outside of Britain for quite so many years now, in part because of that. And when I read about Benison's predicament, as it were, I became, I couldn't help but sympathize. And anyway, you read it. It's a terrific story. And as I say, that self-confidence that he had, winning the tournaments he won, was obviously dented by these malicious articles that were written, and there's great stuff in there with caddies and old stuff that I contributed from days past, and great players involved in it all. It was fun, a lot of fun.
Mr. Jacklin, it would seem to me, looking back over the breadth of your career, right, and some of the things you just mentioned, the things that happened to you or were said about you and those sorts of things, do you remember, was there a point in time, and I've wondered about this in lots of different aspects, not only on this show and other shows that I do, but the media changed at some point in time from delivering the news and reporting on the news to reporting on sensationalism and what could get more headlines or get somebody to now in today's society, right, get more clicks on the internet and that sort of thing. Do you remember, was there a point in time that you saw that things sort of flipped from being about the news to being about sensationalism?
Oh, absolutely, I remember. But I think Britain back in the 60s was ahead of America in the sensationalism, and in my sport I was sort of central to that, and a lot of it was very hurtful, and I was quite sensitive, emotional, if you like. We're not machines, and you can't help but read the press, and when you're reading stuff that's basically made up, it's hurtful, and it's all changed up. I actually found that the American press were a lot more straightforward than the Brits were back then. I'm going back 40, 50 years. But, everything changes, and certainly this social media and sensationalism that exists today. I mean, look at our president. He has to, he's the brunt of most of it. And, he's got to be very thick-skinned on that basis. I think it's a very typical, topical story right now.
So you mentioned this is sort of the stuff of movies. Is that where you'd like to see this ultimately go? Can you see a movie project coming out of this book?
Well, that was the first thing I saw. The characters in it are so strong that it just jumped out at me. Now, whether that happens or not, we'll see. But Mayfield, the lawyer, is such a strong character. He's actually the main character. It's not Eddie Benison. It's his defender. in court that is the true character in this story, and how the things he has to deal with, and Jack Nicklaus was kind enough to do a little bleep for us, and it says it's a bit like a round of golf, and I never realized it at the time, but a round of golf is all about the bounces and how quickly you can recover from the bad bounces, if you like. And in a courtroom, it's very much the same for that legal man. You never know what a witness is going to say, and how quickly can you recover from a slipped word or a slipped statement. It's all fascinating and a wonderful experience. I didn't think at this time in my life I was going to have so much fun doing anything. Honestly, it was a great privilege to be involved in it.
So do you see yourself getting involved in more fictional stories, kind of like this?
Well, I would never say never. I thoroughly enjoyed this exercise, and working with Shelby, who, his background as the top legal counsel for McDonald's, to hear some of his stories of the old days in Chicago. It's all been fascinating, and our wives gelled wonderfully. We've had some wonderful times over this. It's been fun more than anything, and if we succeed with it, well, that's a bonus.
Mr. Jacklin, I want to talk a little bit about your career before we let you go, and everyone seems to always like to talk about the putt on the last hole of the '69 Ryder Cup that Mr. Nicklaus conceded to you, but I want to go one hole back, because on 17 you made a 50-foot eagle putt to keep that match going. What was it like to make a putt of that nature, when you had to have it in a pressure situation like that?
Well, I can only tell you, I was 25 years old, and as a 25-year-old, you think all things are possible. You think you're immortal, I suppose, and I had all the confidence in the world. We played 18 holes in the morning, and I beat Jack 4 and 3 in the morning. I was on top of my game. I was pretty confident. I lost the 16th hole. We were all square after 15, and I lost the 16th. I made bogey there, and Jack made par. But to hold that putt on 17 from 50 feet, and he was inside me for his eagle, that was a real hammer blow to him. It was a sensational week. Obviously we, as a team, Great Britain and Ireland in those days, it was before the Europe got involved. It was the first time we'd really done anything in Ryder Cup for since '57. So it was an important time, and for that one to go in was, I'm not saying it was a fluke, because I was aiming for the hole and I was trying to make the putt, but for it to happen to go in at that moment in time was extra special. And of course, Jack ultimately conceding the 2-footer was, I was ready to make it, but the fact that he picked my marker up and conceded was a great gesture of sportsmanship, and an immense relief to me at the time that I didn't have to do it.
Let's talk a little bit about the Ryder Cups that you captained, and prior to 1985, whether it was Great Britain or the European team, hadn't won a Ryder Cup since 1929. And here you are leading a team, and you had the likes of Seve and Nick Faldo, Ian Woosnam, Bernard Longer, Sam Torrance, Sandy Lott. You had a great team. What was it like getting those guys to believe something that hadn't been done for nearly 60 years, that this team could come together and do it?
Well, it was a special time, and timing, I think, when you look back, especially in sports, timing is everything. When I was asked to do it in '83, the circumstances weren't ideal. I only had 6 months to prepare to be the team. I hadn't got any captain's picks. it was, I had to get things together in very short order, but I recognized that really we were being treated like second-class citizens by our own PGA. And I requested that everything be upgraded. We, at least when you stood on the first tee, we needed to be even Steven with our American counterparts. They were flying Concorde, we were flying British Airways in economy, not knowing what we were paying for or what anybody was going to give us. We'd wear anything anybody gave us clothing-wise. And I upgraded everything. We got a team room. I organized that because we were having meetings in the corner locker rooms. None of it was ideal, and our self-esteem suffered greatly. And I played 7 matches myself over a 14-year period before I became captain. I just knew the way things were done in America. And anyway, once we sorted that out, the players really just were fantastic. They delivered, and it was a golden time for European golf. We had, as you mentioned, we had the Langers and Woosnams and Faldos. Seve was already established. Sandy Lyle came into the picture, Lasabelle. And, they all rallied and rose to the occasion. Once the confidence was there and their self-esteem was restored, they delivered like the champions they were. And the Ryder Cup's been an enormous success ever since. We all look forward to it. And, of course, the Ryder Cup, without that success, the President's Cup wouldn't be there. The guys from Australia and South Africa wanted a part of that. They saw the camaraderie and, team spirit that was all going on. And the gals also got involved in '93 with the Solheim Cup. And all these events now, these team events, have become sensational. The public love them. And the players also love them. And it's a solitary pursuit for the most part, golf. And to get in that team environment as we do in Ryder Cup, and it's so special, and the memories are forever. So it was a great experience. I wouldn't change anything about my major wins. I wouldn't give them up for the world, but my Ryder Cup experiences were extraordinary, and I'll take them to the grave.
Yeah, just a little bit more on that, because that was my next question. And how did the feeling of that team success, and again all those years of drought for the European team, and to get that win, how did that compare with the feelings that individually winning the 2 majors?
Well, it was different. It was a different time in my life. I couldn't have captained a Ryder Cup when I won my majors at 25. I hadn't got the maturity or experience. But it's hard to put words to it. The satisfaction, you're trying to cut. You're looking at body language of players the whole time. You're trying to be their best friend and wrap them in cotton wool the whole week. It was exhausting, to do it, but the satisfaction at the end of it, and as I say, that sort of sense of team, and you're leaning on guys and having one-on-one conversations that will always be private, just to motivate them, and to see it all come to fruition with victory is hard to put words to. Suffice to say, there's a very special bonding between the players and the rest of the team. It was, I've had 33 years now, I think it is, to think about it all. It was a great experience and something that I cherish, and those relationships will go on forever.
Mr. Jacklin, one more before we let you go. And I saw an interview that you did several years ago regarding your Open Championship victory in 1969. And in the interview, you said your overall thought process for the tournament was to stay close, stay in the hunt, and you never know, it might just be your day. What did you tell yourself the night before as you're trying to sleep on a two-stroke lead heading into the final round and guys chasing you like Mr. Nicholas, Peter Thompson, Roberto DiVincenzo, Bob Charles, all right there behind you? What did you tell yourself, and were you able to get much sleep?
Well, I'll tell you, we rented a house. Bert Yancey and Tom Weisskopf and our respective wives all stayed together that week. And I took a sleeping pill at about 9:30. And it was actually Bert Yancey guided me upstairs and put me into bed. And I had 8 hours solid sleep. So, it's hard to explain, the mental state. I knew I needed that sleep. I couldn't have done without that. I woke up refreshed early the next morning. And then, of course, you've got this sort of dilemma of waiting half a day before you tee off. I think the tee off time was about 2:30. And all the nerves and trying not to go to the golf course or keep your mind away from what may happen. I think I was at a museum or something in the morning, trying to keep my mind away from what could happen that afternoon, because it's an enormous thing. And the more you want something, of course, the more likely you are to get ahead of yourself. That's just human nature. But the fact that I was able to deal with it was down to, I'd had a couple of years by then playing the American Tour. I'd had my win at Jacksonville in '68. I knew I was a good player. And I wanted to be as good as I could be. And as I said earlier, I was young, I was resilient, I was, I was ready, and the time was right. And I managed to get it done. But I could never underestimate the hurdle. It's a tall order. Winning majors, of course, and I knew winning majors was all it was ever about, really. If you want to be remembered. So I've been very fortunate in my life to have won a couple. Of course, I went close a couple of times too, but we won't go there. Suffice to say, I was gratified, and it was an amazing time in my life, especially being so young.
Again, the title of Mr. Jacklin's new book is called Bad Lies, A Story of Libel, Slander, and Professional Golf. It was released today. It's available out on Amazon.com. Mr. Jacklin, thank you so much for being generous with your time and coming back and being a part of the show tonight. You're fantastic. I've always enjoyed the time I've gotten to spend with you, so I thank you for doing it again tonight, and I hope we get the privilege of doing it again real soon.
Thank you, Chris. My pleasure. God bless you.
All right. Take care, Mr. Jacklin. All the best to you and your family.
Thank you.
That is, again, the great Tony Jacklin. And again, one more time, the name of the book, Bad Lies, A Story of Libel, Slander, and Professional Golf. Again, it's available today out on Amazon.com.